Greetings, fellow cultivators. Welcome to Autonova. Remember to like and subscribe to support the journey. Now, let's dive into the next chapter of A Will Eternal. Xiaochun, Zhao Tianzhao said, his tone serious. As you know, everyone participating in this 10-year-long trial has to go out on at least 3 missions beyond the wall. You can choose when to do that, but there is no way to get out of the responsibility. In other words, you have to go out of the Great Wall at some point. Zhao Tianzhao clasped his shoulder. When the time comes, you'll have to go, even if you don't want to. Otherwise, you'll fail the final test, and won't be able to go back to the sect. Bai Xiaochun's heart trembled. The thought of going out 3 times on missions made the world seem like a much darker place. Although he had heard of that arrangement, he hadn't given it much thought before, and had assumed it wouldn't be anything worth worrying about. But after seeing the dangers on the journey so far, he realized that the slightest misstep could lead to him losing his poor little life. Then he contemplated going outside of the Great Wall on 3 different occasions, and couldn't help but think that it was nothing less than a deadly trap. However, he didn't let any of his fear show on his face. In fact, he even stuck his chin up, as if he didn't care at all about the subject. It's only 3 times, right? Not a big deal at all. You don't need to remind me, elder brother Zhao. When the time comes, of course I'll do what needs to be done. Zhao Tianzhao laughed loudly and smacked Bai Xiaochun's shoulder. Good, that's how Zhao Tianzhao's junior brother Bai should act. Very well, I won't go on and on about it. Based on our current speed, we should catch sight of the Great Wall itself within about half a month. That's where we will part ways. I hope that by the time we meet again, whether it's inside the Great Wall or out, that both of us will have made names for ourselves. With that, he took out a flagon of alcohol, took a long drink, and then handed it to Bai Xiaochun. As of this moment, Zhao Tianzhao seemed tall and mighty, and absolutely impressive. Behind him, Chen Yushan looked on with sparkling eyes. Bai Xiaochun slapped his chest, took the flagon, and drank a big mouthful. Despite how grand he was trying to look, it was to his disappointment that he realized that Chen Yushan and the others in the group all had eyes fixed on Zhao Tianzhao. Ahem, he thought to himself. Low profile. I'm the type who keeps a low profile. Half a month flew by. One morning, when the first rays of dawn were peeking out from the east, Bai Xiaochun opened his eyes and looked over at the horizon to see something that looked almost like a mountain range. It was the Great Wall. The sight left Bai Xiaochun completely shaken, and was almost impossible to describe with words. The Great Wall was like a hulking dragon lying on the horizon, snaking back and forth for as far as the eye could see. It was fully 6,000 meters tall, a barrier that completely separated the lands on either side, and completely prevented anything on the outside from getting in. In addition to the physical structure of the wall, there was a black, shimmering shield of light that rose from the top of the wall into the heavens. With that shield in place, everything on the other side was completely sealed out. The wall and the shield together created what seemed like an impassable barrier. As for the wall itself, it wasn't black, but violet. Bai Xiaochun was even able to detect the reek of blood coming from it. It was possible to imagine that, years in the past, the wall had actually been black, but over time, had been stained by the endless flow of blood which ran down it. The lands leading up to the wall were completely barren and devoid of life. There was a bleakness to the area that even seemed to affect the clouds above, staining them violent and spinning them into a wild vortex that emitted occasional rumbling sounds. Red lightning danced in that vortex, almost like red dragons flitting about and roaring. The wall was violet, and the shield was black. Each tile and brick that formed the wall emanated incredible pressure, and all of that together created the ultimate division between the lands of Heavenspan and the Wildlands. Currently visible atop the wall itself were over 100 magical cannons, ferocious weapons that seemed mighty enough to destroy the heavens and extinguish the earth. Right in the middle of the Great Wall was a city that was fully 10 times larger than either East Sea City or World City. That city formed the gate which led into and out of the Great Wall. Countless auras could be detected within that city, each and every one of which seemed to pulse with the blood of countless battles, and were suffused with complete and utter determination. Based on what Bai Xiaochun could sense, there were millions upon millions of such auras. Furthermore, in addition to the numerous nascent soul auras, there was something else, something that could shake heaven and earth, something powerful that it seemed to be a part of creation itself. It was a diva. Diva were rare, but there was one here. Furthermore, it was a diva that neither Bai Xiaochun nor Zhao Tianzhao were unfamiliar with. It was Chen Yushan's father, three-eyed Chen Hichan, who had arrived in the city much earlier than them. In the following years, he would be tasked with leading the defense against the Wildlands. In the very middle of the city was a five-sided pagoda, a tower that stretched 30,000 meters into the sky. From the top of that tower, everything on either side of the Great Wall was clearly visible. The intense light which flickered inside of it was enough to shock anyone who laid eyes on it. At the very top of the pagoda was a huge pearl fully 300 meters wide, inside of which was a mysterious, swirling mist that occasionally formed together into an eye with two pupils. Anyone who that eye looked at would instantly begin to shake, as if the will of the heavens were focusing on them. Even as Bai Xiaochun was looking at the tower in shock, Zhao Tianzhao whispered, "Starry Sky Pagoda." When Zhao Tianzhao looked at the pagoda, it was with utter fervor and deep respect. "It's a holy object of our Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect. The Starry Sky Pagoda. I heard that sealed inside of that pearl is a true spirit." "True spirit," Bai Xiaochun said, a look of shock appearing on his face. "Even I don't know what a true spirit really is. But my master told me that with that true spirit in place, the Great Wall is no longer an inanimate object. Instead, it possesses a life force of its own. The pagoda not only possesses all types of strange defensive powers, but also forms the heart of the Great Wall. All matters pertaining to battle credits and resource distribution are under the control of the pagoda." Suddenly, Zhao Tianzhao took a deep breath and pointed his finger out. "Xiaochun, look, surrounding the Starry Sky Pagoda are the banners of the 5 legions." Sure enough, 5 banners could be seen flapping in the wind, a dazzling and eye-catching sight that made it possible to distinguish the 5 legions of the army, even from a distance. The 5 banners were all a different color, and all had different sigils. All of them were very unique, but one of them seemed to stand out in particular to Bai Xiaochun. The sigil on that banner depicted a wildlands savage that had been skinned alive. The sigil was extremely lifelike, and it was even possible to see the skinned savage howling from the pain. Bai Xiaochun was almost sure that he could hear a blood-curdling scream when he looked at the banner. Those banners represent the 5 legions that make up the Hall of Steel Veins, each one of which has accomplished incredible things during the wars throughout the years. The 5 legions are the Skin Flayers, the Black Demons, the Bane Stars, the Savage Butcherers, and the Soul Slaughterers. The Skin Flayers, Bai Xiaochun said with a gasp. For some reason, that name really caused his mind to tremble. Each legion has their own banner, which not only represents what they've accomplished in battle, but also demonstrates how incredible they are. See the Skin Flayers banner? I've heard that their legion is incredibly bloodthirsty. Whenever they march to battle, they skin their enemies alive. Their name alone causes the savages outside the Great Wall to tremble in fear. From the way Zhao Tianzhao's eyes glowed with reverence, it was obvious that he very much wanted to join one of the 5 legions. Bai Xiaochun swallowed hard. After seeing the 5 banners, he thought more than ever that he should keep his distance from them. Zhao Tianzhao was almost breathless as he revealed everything he knew. "Xiaochun, did you know that beyond the Great Wall, the savages have something called the execution list? Once your name gets on that list, everyone in the wildlands will do everything they can to kill you. The generals of the 5 legions are all in the top 10 of that list, the highest among them being the general of the Skinflayers, Bai Lin. He has the same surname as you, and is highest on the list at 6th place, surpassed by only the Devas." The more Bai Xiaochun learned about the Great Wall, the more dangerous and unsafe it seemed. As the group neared Great Wall City, they reached a certain point where a rippling fluctuation appeared, surrounding them and locking them in place. It was impossible to detect with the naked eye, and almost immediately surrounded them with indescribable restrictive power that made it almost impossible for them to move. Even Zhao Tianzhao suddenly lurched to a stop and couldn't move a muscle. The same thing happened to Chen Yushan, Bai Xiaochun, and the others in the group. All of them were suddenly as stiff as boards, completely incapable of movement. Next, the rippling power used some unknown method to examine their identity medallions and confirm that the medallions belonged to them. Even Chen Yushan, daughter of 3-eyed Chen Hechan, was examined thoroughly. After that, another fluctuation passed through them, and they could sense their souls being examined. It only lasted for a moment, but even that short bit of time left Bai Xiaochun and the others all trembling as if they had just had a brush with death. After all, they had just been immobilized and scanned with divine sense. If they had harbored any ill intentions at all, they would have been killed beyond the shadow of a doubt. After the rigid examination, the fluctuations locking them in place slowly faded away, and they regained the ability to move. Expressions flickering, they continued on toward Great Wall City. Moments before, when the small group was being stopped and inspected, a door had opened somewhere in Great Wall City, and a middle-aged cultivator had stepped out, clad in a black suit of armor. He emanated the fluctuations of the Great Circle of Core formation, as well as a bleakly murderous aura which grew more intense by the moment. The man took only 4 steps, and yet, that placed him right in front of the newly arrived group. Even Zhao Tianzhao could sense that this man's murderous aura was unusual and unique. When his eyes fell upon Chen Yushan, he immediately clasped hands and bowed. I am your humble servant, Colonel Li Hongming of the Skinflayers. The inspection you underwent just now was merely protocol. Great Wall City's spell formation has a special function which strictly inspects every person who comes in. I hope you can forgive me for the unexpected inconvenience. From the way Li Hongming was speaking, it was clear that he didn't expect a response from any of them, but rather, wanted them to listen carefully. It is not permitted to tarry inside of Great Wall City, and in fact, the other trial takers won't even be allowed inside. They can only pass in and out of the Great Wall via a side gate, and must take no more than the time it takes an incense stick to burn to do so. However, the Diva Patriarch passed down orders that your group would be allowed in the city, albeit for only a single day. After that, you must leave. I've been tasked with overseeing your stay, and therefore, you are not allowed to leave my sight. Please do abide by that arrangement. With that, he turned and began to walk off. When Bai Xiaochun examined Li Hongming, he could tell that the man's cultivation base was only a bit higher than his own, and yet, his murderous aura was vastly more intense. Furthermore, his eyes seemed to radiate a feeling of blood, as though he had killed too many souls to even count. The fact that a person like that was a mere colonel in charge of 1,000 soldiers left Bai Xiaochun even more shaken regarding the 5 legions. After a moment of silence, Zhao Tianzhao hurried after Li Hongming and asked, Brother Li, why did the inspection from before even go as deep as our souls? Without even turning his head to look at Zhao Tianzhao, Li Hongming said, 160-year cycle ago, the vengeful souls outside the Great Wall devised a unique possession technique that allowed them to masquerade as cultivators. They used that technique to try to infiltrate Great Wall City and assassinate the generals. From that point on, we took precautions against such methods. Everyone who wants to enter the city must first undergo a soul inspection. Zhao Tianzhao nodded and didn't ask any further questions. Bai Xiaochun followed along cautiously with the rest of the group as Li Hongming led them into Great Wall City itself. He could instantly tell that the place was different from East Sea City or World City. First of all, there were no shops anywhere to be seen. Although there were a lot of people present, most of them wore suits of armor, and had cold, expressionless faces. This wasn't really a city, it was a huge military base. The cultivators were all members of the 5 legions, each of which had their own section of the city to themselves. There was a harsh, stern atmosphere that weighed down everywhere, leaving Bai Xiaochun and the rest of the group feeling somewhat unsettled. Even Zhao Tianzhao was affected. When Li Hongming saw the reactions of Bai Xiaochun and the others, a cold smile appeared on his face, and a bit of scorn could be seen in his eyes. He obviously didn't have a very good opinion of them, and were it not for the orders of the Diva Patriarch, he would never have lowered himself to the point of giving them a tour of the city. As far as he was concerned, his current task was simply taking him away from fighting or cultivation. They're nothing but a bunch of highfalutin kids from the sect, here to see what war looks like. Although his heart was filled with scorn, he kept his face expressionless as he led them through Great Wall City. Along the way, various cultivators from the 5 legions looked over at Li Hongming, and when they saw the type of armor he was wearing, would clasp hands and offer respectful greetings. Greetings, Colonel. My respects, Colonel. Bai Xiaochun heard many such greetings being called out, and when he saw the looks of respect on the faces of the other cultivators, couldn't help but be curious about the rank of Colonel. Zhao Tianzhao and the others were all wrapped up in their own thoughts as they looked around at the violet walls of the city. Everything in the city was violet, including the buildings, and emanated a reek of blood. Great Wall City is divided into 5 districts, corresponding to the 5 legions. We are currently in the district assigned to the Skinflayers, which is itself larger than all of World City. The Skinflayers district is further subdivided into 10 garrisons. As for that area over there, it belongs to General Bai Lin. Li Hongming was currently pointing to an area with a vast, 300-meter-tall building that looked like a violet coffin. The coffin was emblazoned with the sigil of the Skinflayers, and emanated a very sinister air. As he looked around, Bai Xiaochun could see the looks of zealous devotion in the eyes of the cultivators when they looked at the huge coffin. It was the same even with Li Hongming. The other areas are similar, so I won't take you to look at all of them. Having led them on a rather circuitous route through the city, Li Hongming finally took them into a rather ordinary-looking courtyard. Li Hongming looked up at the noon sun and then coolly said, "It's getting late, so why don't you rest up a bit? There's a curfew at night, so remember that, and be careful." Bai Xiaochun looked up at the sun, and could tell that it was actually very early, and not anywhere close to nighttime. Li Hongming clearly didn't want to waste any more time showing them around. I'll escort you out tomorrow morning at first light. With that, Li Hongming turned to leave. Zhao Tianzhao was frowning, and seemed to be on the verge of saying something when Chen Yushan took a step forward and said, "Brother Li, please wait a moment." Li Hongming stopped in place. If anyone else in the group had spoken up, he would have ignored them, but Chen Yushan's status was different. Frowning slightly, he turned to look at her. "Brother Li, would you mind taking us up to the Great Wall to look around?" she said lightly, giving voice the words that Zhao Tianzhao had just been thinking. After a moment of silence, Li Hongming slowly said, "There's currently a battle going on, making it quite dangerous. If we go up, I can't guarantee your safety. Are you sure you want to go?" "Yes, we're sure," Zhao Tianzhao said, nodding his head. Bai Xiaochun hesitated for a moment, but seeing how everyone else was nodding, he decided to go along. "We definitely want to go have a look." Li Hongming did nothing further to dissuade them. Turning in a different direction, he began to lead them toward the Great Wall itself. It was some distance to the edge of the city where it connected to the wall. Even with Li Hongming leading them, it took the time it takes an incense stick to burn before they arrived. As Bai Xiaochun stood there, looking up at the enormous wall, he felt so truly insignificant that it was suffocating. Zhao Tianzhao and Chen Yushan had the same feeling, as did the others in the group. The imposing pressure of the wall caused their hearts to race, their blood to boil, and their cultivation bases to spin rapidly. Their reaction only served to increase Li Hongming's disdain. "All right, get onto the stairs. In a moment you'll get to feel what war is like." As soon as Li Hongming stepped onto the stairs, ripples spread out in all directions, revealing what appeared to be more than 10,000 steps leading up to the top of the wall. Zhao Tianzhao immediately stepped forward, and Chen Yushan followed, pausing briefly on the first step before hurrying after Li Hongming. From where Bai Xiaochun was standing, he couldn't hear anything that was happening beyond the wall, but as soon as he stepped onto the stairs, he could instantly hear screaming and yelling. At the same time, his heart began to thump as if with the desire to do battle. Something's off, he thought. After looking around for a moment, he quickly hurried after the others. Soon, the stairs were blurring by beneath his feet, and the sounds of screaming and yelling were getting more intense. Before long, he had reached the final stair, and was on top of the wall. At that point, the sounds of battle rang loudly in his ears. He could hear agonized screams, enraged roars, and maniacal laughing, along with booms and rumbling that could shake lands and rock mountains. The wall was so wide at the very top that 100 people could patrol it in formation. And yet, it was still packed with cultivators, all of them wearing black suits of armor emblazoned with the sigil of the skinflayers, their murderous auras rising high into the heavens. Some of them were operating the enormous magical cannons, sending destructive beams of light down the area beyond the wall. Others were at the ramparts, unleashing magical techniques and powerful attacks. There were some who had flown off the wall and were fighting the mist like clouds that were hordes of vengeful souls. The deafening sounds of battle instantly assailed Bai Xiaochun's mind, leaving him gasping in shock. However, he quickly recovered, and looked over to find Li Hongming staring at him in shock. As it turned out, he was the first to regain his senses. Neither Zhao Tianzhao nor any of the others had recovered from the shocking sight of the field of battle. Bai Xiaochun was the first of the group to recover, which was apparently quite a surprise to Li Hongming, who had been standing there with his arms crossed, looking at the small group. Throughout the years, he had seen many such trial takers come to the Great Wall, and whenever they saw true battle for the first time, they always needed a bit of time to recover. At the minimum, it usually took them several breaths of time to do so, and yet this nameless cultivator in front of him had only required a single breath of time. In fact, from the look of it, it might have been even slightly faster than that. Apparently, this young man was no stranger to war. Of course, compared to Zhao Tianzhao and the others in the group, Bai Xiaochun had a lot more experience on the field of battle. Thanks to everything that had occurred in the lower reaches and the middle reaches, he was very familiar with large-scale conflicts. However, despite his familiarity, it was still a shock to see all of the cultivators atop the wall fighting, and especially with the magical cannons. Furthermore, all of that quickly tore his attention to what was happening outside the wall. Beyond the wall, the sky was crimson, as though it had been stained red by countless years of flame. Even the ground outside was bright red, a sharp contrast to the black soil inside the Great Wall. Down below the wall were vast numbers of vengeful souls, their faces twisted into vicious expressions, and they screamed and howled, doing everything in their power to try to destroy the wall itself. They were the souls of men and women, old and young, all of them vicious beyond compare, and charging forward and tide like waves of attack. The number of souls was mind-boggling. Wherever Bai Xiaochun looked, he saw nothing but vengeful souls, whether it was on the ground or in the air. It was as if he were looking out at a massive sea of souls. Some were attacking the black glowing shield, and others were gnashing and biting at the wall itself. Many were flying up and trying to attack the skin flayers who were out in the open. Although the vengeful souls could attack and retreat at will, the black shield and the wall held strong against them. For the skin flayers, things were different. Most of them were on the wall, and even if they did charge out into the open for an offensive, they always had to return to the wall at some point, and rely on the protection of the shield to weaken the souls for a period before beginning another offensive. In addition to the vengeful souls, there were occasionally giants visible within the enemy forces. Most of them were about 3 meters tall, and despite being physically imposing, seemed emaciated and sickly. Even still, they were crazed, bloodthirsty and completely vicious, and their eyes radiated with unfathomable hatred whenever they looked in the direction of the Great Wall. Bai Xiaochun instantly recognized those giants. They were none other than wildlands savages. Most of them held back, looking for opportunities created by the Sea of Souls. Once such an opportunity presented itself, they would call upon their fleshly body power to rocket through the air like meteors. The attacks of the savages were what the skin flayers on the Great Wall would get most nervous about. Whenever they happened, the cultivators would fly off of the wall to counterattack with full force. Rumbling booms filled the air, and crimson blood and gore filled the battlefield as the bitter fighting went on. Even as Bai Xiaochun looked around to take everything in, the savages outside seemed to take notice of him. They could tell that he and his group were new arrivals, and one of them, who happened to be a bit larger than the others, suddenly launched himself into the air toward them. Howling, he sped along in a beam of light, simultaneously performing a double-handed incantation gesture, which caused numerous vengeful souls to join him in his charge. In the blink of an eye, Bai Xiaochun saw blackened, yellowish teeth and an emaciated body hurtling madly in his direction. Li Hongming's pupils constricted, and he strode forward, right hand flashing in an incantation gesture before waving his finger in the direction of the savage. At the same time, numerous nearby skin flayers also began to charge forward. To see the savage staring at him in such bloodthirsty fashion caused Bai Xiaochun's heart to prickle in fear. And yet, the more danger he was in, the more explosively he would react. Having no time to considering the situation, he opened his heaven-span Dharma eye, causing a violet beam of light to shoot out. The violet light almost instantly landed on the savage, wrapping around him. The effect only lasted for a moment before he freed himself, but within that time, Bai Xiaochun performed an incantation gesture, causing shocking frigid qi to roil out. Cracking sounds could instantly be heard as layers of ice sprang up around the attacking savage. Simultaneously, Li Hongming and the other soldiers attacked, causing booming sounds to echo out in all directions. That was when Zhao Tianzhao and Chen Yushan recovered. Expressions flickering, they also joined in the attack. Amidst the rumbling sounds, the savage let out a miserable shriek, and was torn to shreds. Black blood burst out in all directions, but was too far away from the wall and the shield to hit them. Instead, it splashed down onto the ground below, where it hissed and sizzled as it dissolved the soil. The savage's blood is filled with various toxins, Li Hongming explained, and is strong enough to erode the wall itself. It's a new development from within the last 100 years, and is why we can't let the savages even get close to the Great Wall. From the look in his eyes, the disdain he had felt toward Bai Xiaochun seemed to have lessened significantly. Bai Xiaochun looked down wide-eyed at the crater which had been melted by the savage's blood, and his heart trembled. They're not savages, he thought, they're more like pill furnaces on the verge of exploding. I can't believe that's what happens when you kill them. Despite the fact that he was even more nervous than ever, he could tell that Li Hongming was looking at him differently than before, so he forced his chin up and coolly said, "It's been quite some time that I've hoped to feast my eyes on fighting like this. Presumably, battles like this don't happen very often." Li Hongming's derision for Bai Xiaochun was continuing to lessen, so he smiled and explained, "Of course they do. Small-scale skirmishes like this happen every 2 or 3 days." Bai Xiaochun would rather have not heard such an explanation, and his heart immediately began to thump. Looking out beyond the wall, he saw a sea of souls, the countless savages, and even certain locations where there were huge, ferocious battle beasts. This is a small-scale skirmish, he thought in surprise. What are the big battles like? Not only did everything look very dangerous, but it reminded him that he had to go outside of the Great Wall on at least 3 missions. What a headache. Smiling faintly, Li Hongming looked at Zhao Tianzhao and the others and said, "Very well, it's dangerous here on top of the wall. Now that you've had your look at war, why don't we head back down?" Bai Xiaochun was just about to agree when Zhao Tianzhao took a deep breath. Eyes sparkling, he looked down at the fighting and said, "Brother Li, how long will this battle last?" Li Hongming looked around for a moment to assess the situation, then replied, "From the look of things, I'd say the soul tide will recede tonight. Then there will be a day or two of peace and quiet. In that case, I'll wait here. Once the battle is over, I'd like to immediately go out into the wildlands to begin my training." Bai Xiaochun had known all along that Zhao Tianzhao would think in this way, and wasn't surprised at all. However, Li Hongming seemed quite taken aback. "You want to go outside of the Great Wall? That's why I came here. To go out into the wildlands." Li Hongming looked at Zhao Tianzhao a bit more closely for a moment before clasping hands and bowing deeply. "In all the years I've been stationed here in Great Wall City, I can't count how many people have gone out into the wildlands, never to return. Fellow Taoist Zhao, the fact that you have such a goal despite your incredible status is truly worthy of respect. I truly hope that your journeys are safe, fellow Taoist." Zhao Tianzhao laughed heartily, then looked over at Chen Yushan. Placing her hand over her mouth to cover her smile, she walked over without a word to stand at Zhao Tianzhao's side. Her message was clear, she would stay with Zhao Tianzhao wherever he went. It might be dangerous on the outside, and she might have a reputation as being one of the most beloved young women in the sect, but at the moment, those things didn't matter to her. As for Zhao Tianzhao's 2 followers, and Chen Yushan's 2 close friends, none of them said anything. Originally, they had planned to go along with Zhao Tianzhao and Chen Yushan, but after seeing the deadly fighting just now, they were left so shaken that they could only look down at the ground in an attempt to hide the shame on their faces. Zhao Tianzhao didn't seem to care. Smiling broadly, he looked at Bai Xiaochun. "Xiaochun, will you be joining us?" Bai Xiaochun cleared his throat. Considering that he was only in the late gold core stage, he didn't feel that going out into the wildlands would be a very good idea. Perhaps once he reached the Great Circle, then he would go out. At least at that point, he would be more capable of defending himself. By then, he could just make a quick trip outside and back, and hopefully, wouldn't find himself in too much danger. By enduring the next 10 years in such a fashion, he could then go back to the sect and trade his Diva soul for a set of 5 elements Diva Beast souls. Taking the safe and easy route to the nascent soul stage was the way for him. Having reached this point in his train of thought, Bai Xiaochun felt more confident in his decision than ever, and was just trying to decide whether or not to explain his decision, when suddenly, cries of shock could be heard from the surrounding skinflayers. Many faces in the area filled with astonishment, and despite the fact that the spiritual energy was so weak, many people unleashed the power of their cultivation bases. The sudden development left Bai Xiaochun, Zhao Tianzhao and everyone else stunned. Looking out at the battlefield, they saw that the seemingly endless tide of souls had suddenly stopped moving. In fact, they even began to back up. At the same time, there were no vicious expressions on their faces anymore, but rather, what appeared to be flickers of intelligence. It was a very odd-looking sight, such expressions seemed very out of place. If that were all there were to the situation, it might not have been a big deal. But then, the vengeful souls threw their heads back and let out ear-piercing howls, and at the same time began to rush toward each other and clump into groups. In the blink of an eye, more than 10 300-meter-tall soul emperors had formed on the battlefield. They had broad shoulders and seemingly muscular bodies made up of countless souls, and each one of them wielded different magical weapons. The mere sight of them was enough to shake heaven and earth. The more than 10 enormous soul emperors let out terrifying howls as they brandished their magical weapons in shocking fashion. Bai Xiaochun's eyes went wide at the sight of the soul emperors, and he couldn't help but think of the soul emperor he had seen in the Cyan trial by fire back in the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect. That soul emperor there looked almost exactly like these ones. The terrifying soul emperors out on the battlefield seemed incredibly powerful, almost as if they were comparable to nascent soul experts. In addition to the more than 10 soul emperors, Bai Xiaochun could also see that there were certain souls out on the battlefield that were different from the others. The ordinary vengeful souls weren't intelligent and couldn't use magical items. For the most part, they acted on instinct and were mostly illusory, like smoke. But now, 7 or 8 figures could be seen on the battlefield, clad in voluminous black robes complete with deep hoods that obscured their heads and faces. It was impossible to say when they had appeared, but now they hovered in midair, surrounded by crackling black lightning. There were also some vengeful souls that were beast-like in appearance, and held enormous weapons in their hands as they strode forward. In addition, at one point off in the distance, swirling smoke formed into the shape of a warhorse with blood-red eyes and flames surrounding its hooves. Seated on the back of the warhorse of smoke was a grey-robed man. Clearly, that man was no vengeful spirit, and neither was he a savage. He was a cultivator. Or perhaps it would be more accurate to say that he was like a cultivator. He was tall and thin, and the skin of the hand which held the reins of the horse was pure white and seemingly devoid of any dirt or filth whatsoever. There was something elegant about him, something that made him seem beyond ordinary. Furthermore, he wasn't alone. Flanking him were 7 or 8 men and women wearing dilapidated clothing, yet who were very good-looking. As they stood there staring at the Great Wall, eyes flickering coldly, the cultivation base fluctuations rolling off of them placed them in the core formation stage. Immediately, the nearby emaciated savages bowed their heads and clasped hands, expressions of awe and reverence on their faces. When Bai Xiaochun saw the black warhorse, the first thing he thought of was Bruiser. Then he looked more closely at the figure in the grey robe mounted atop it, and realized that there was definitely something different about him. He almost seemed like a king to the vengeful souls and the savages, as if he could single-handedly control all of them. For some reason, Bai Xiaochun found himself thinking about Chen Manyao and the group she represented. When Li Hongming saw the grey-robed figure, his expression flickered. Who would have thought that a small-scale skirmish like this would see the appearance of soul cultivators and necromancers? Zhao Tianzhao stared at the grey-robed man, coldness rising up in his heart as he asked, soul cultivators? Necromancers? In the wildlands, Li Hongming said in a low voice, vengeful souls are considered to be the lowest ranking and least powerful of all entities. Then come the savages, and after that, the soul cultivators. At the top are the necromancers. As for the soul cultivators, they are powerful cultivators who treat the savages like nothing more than servants. There is no spiritual energy for them to cultivate, so they settle for the next best thing. They use soul vitality instead of spiritual power, and that is why they are called soul cultivators. The people responsible for capturing the most powerful vengeful souls, the masters of soul manipulation techniques, and the ones who extract soul vitality for the soul cultivators to use, are rare in the wildlands, and are highly valued. They are the necromancers. Necromancers are terrifying beings. Each and every one is a powerful expert who can control souls, merge them together, and even contain souls inside their bodies to be unleashed with devastating power. Even as Li Hongming was explaining about soul cultivators and necromancers, the grey-robed man on the black warhorse extended his right hand and pointed at the Great Wall. In response, the more than 10 gigantic soul emperors roared and began to charge across the battlefield, followed by the numerous battle beasts in the area. Of course, not all of the vengeful souls on the field of battle had been used to make the soul emperors, so there were plenty of ordinary vengeful souls to accompany them in their charge. There were also the pitch-black souls in mid-air, surrounded by black lightning, and the souls with special magical weapons. As the charge began, intense rumblings echoed out that were enough to topple mountains and drain seas. The savages also howled as they began to run toward the Great Wall, with only the grey-robed man and the 7 or 8 soul cultivators remaining unmoving as they watched the scene play out. The battle was ramping up, and deafening rumbling sounds were already filling the air. As for Zhao Tianzhao, he stood looking out at the battle, listening intently to Li Hongming's explanation. Although Zhao Tianzhao knew quite a bit about the wildlands, Li Hongming had personally been here fighting battles for many years, so clearly, his understanding was much deeper and clearer. Bai Xiaochun stood there licking his lips as he looked at the soul cultivators and the grey-robed man. He had a bit of a different perspective than Zhao Tianzhao. He had been dealing with the wildlands for a long time now, and was very glad to have this additional information from Li Hongming. Neither the vengeful souls nor the savages are the true rulers of the wildlands, he thought. The real ones in charge are the so-called rebels who have been forced to live out there. Originally, there probably weren't very many of them, but after all the years that have passed, they've multiplied and become many. Considering how barren the place is, they have no choice but to use soul vitality to practice cultivation. And that's why they're called soul cultivators. The necromancers must just be outstanding figures among soul cultivators. He said they're adept at manipulating souls, so I wonder if the process is similar to how medicine is concocted or magical items are forged. Even as Bai Xiaochun was wrapped up in these thoughts, Chen Yushan frowned. 1. Footnote. A quick note that necromancer has a Chinese character in it that is relatively common in Ah and in Shenxia stories in general, and that is Lian. You will often see this characters translated as refine, because that is the most common dictionary definition for the character on its own. However, when combined with other words, that refine character doesn't necessarily mean refine. For example, Lian Dan is literally refine pill, but is a real-world Taoist term that means to concoct or make pills of immortality. That's why I translate Lian Dan as pill concocting. In the terminology, in Chinese, is slightly different, so we have medicine concocting instead of pill concocting, with the verb being the same, but the noun part changing from the pill character to the medicine character. Anyway, I digress. If you remember way back in chapter 4 of there was a line that talks about the main skills relevant to immortal cultivation, those being medicine concocting, equipment forging, and spirit enhancement. All of those terms use the character lien as the verb. I chose early on not to try to have all those verbs match, since the former two were holdovers from ISSTH, and clearly should not use the refined definition. Furthermore, I felt that spirit enhancement was a more accurate description of that skill. In the case of the necromancers, we find that same Chinese character used again. As for what exactly it means, refine, concoct, forge, use, manipulate souls, you can't tell from the context. In any case, they practice some sort of technique, skill, magic that has to do with souls. Even if soul cultivators are strong, and necromancers are rare, what are they doing here? What gives them the courage to take on the entire Great Wall with just that small group? Aren't they worried that we will charge out and kill them? Chen Yuxian wasn't the only one pondering that very question. Zhao Tianzhao had also been thinking about it. Even Bai Xiaochun looked over expectantly at Li Hongming. Li Hongming didn't respond. Instead, he extended his right hand, within which appeared a jade slip that he apparently used to transmit some orders. Next, 10 enormous magical cannons suddenly began to power up on the Great Wall, sending powerful fluctuations out in all directions. Moments later, rumbling sounds could be heard as bright beams of light shot out from the cannons out onto the battlefield. The air distorted around the beams of light as they shot toward the Soul Emperors, some of whom let out miserable shrieks as they were destroyed. The beams of light cut through them like a hot knife through butter, and then proceeded onward to destroy more savages and souls behind them. In an instant, the light was closing in on the necromancer. Those 10 beams of light were powerful enough to destroy nascent soul cultivators, and yet, when they hit the necromancer and the soul cultivators, their bodies simply faded away. Obviously, they hadn't been killed, but rather, had visited the battlefield via projection, and not with their true forms. Chen Yuxian's jaw dropped, and Zhao Tianzhao's pupils constricted. Even Bai Xiaochun was completely taken aback. Apparently, Li Hongming wasn't at all surprised by Chen Yuxian's question, and had even been expecting it. Back when I first arrived at the Great Wall, I had similar questions. Unfortunately, no one provided me with any answers, and I only learned the truth after seeing things with my own eyes. Turning to face her, he said, "I suspect you don't know as much about the wildlands as you think you do. The wildlands are huge, much larger than the Heavenspan River that we come from. The vengeful souls there are so numerous that they are without end. For countless tens upon tens of thousands of years, the savages there have been born with the power of gods running in their veins. After they grow up, some of them become giants that are thousands of meters tall. There are also countless vicious beasts in the wildlands, the type that would shock you to hear them described. Remember, it's not just the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect who resists the wildlands, it's all of the sects in the Heavenspan River Basin. Furthermore, we aren't the only ones who have devas. Nor are we the only ones to have demigods." As Li Hongming continued with his explanation, Bai Xiaochun looked out at the spot where the necromancer and the soul cultivators had been standing, as well as the terrifying battle which was playing out. Even as he was sighing and cursing about ending up in a place like this, Zhao Tianzhao threw his head back and laughed uproariously. If the wildlands were filled with weaklings, then what would be the point of going there for training? The lands out there are filled with crouching tigers and hidden dragons, which make them the perfect place for me. Besides, the wildlands might be strong, with even devas and demigods, but we have the celestial. With the celestial on our side, the wildlands will be the wildlands for all eternity. They will always be stuck outside the Great Wall, and will never pollute our Heavenspan Sea. Zhao Tianzhao seemed very grand as he stood there and uttered such words, so much so that Li Hongming also joined him in laughing. That's right, we have the celestial, so the wildlands will always and ever be stuck on the outside. That's how things have always been. A strong gleam of approval could be seen in Li Hongming's eyes as he looked at Zhao Tianzhao. As the two of them laughed together, Zhao Tianzhao looked over at Bai Xiaochun and could see that he was nervous. "Xiaochun, does it scare you to see all those souls and hear about how strong the wildlands are? Cultivation is fundamentally a defiance of the heavens, so we cultivators should obviously dominate the battlefield to carve out our own great Tao." When faced with the heroic-looking Zhao Tianzhao and Li Hongming, Bai Xiaochun knew that he couldn't let himself look scared. Glaring at them, he slapped his chest hard and loudly declared, "Scared? Who said I'm scared? I could destroy those puny souls as easy as turning over my hand. Looking out at the tide of souls and the soul emperors, Bai Xiaochun decided to make his words even more persuasive, and to truly convince them that he wasn't afraid. Therefore, he had to take some action. Slapping his bag of holding, he produced a soul convergence pill. Looking disdainfully down at the battlefield, he threw the pill out. Take this. As the medicinal pill flew through the air, he performed an incantation gesture and then waved his finger at it. As he did, the pill landed amidst the sea of souls, and then exploded. Instantly, a terrifying gravitational force erupted out, becoming a black hole fully 300 meters wide. All of the souls in that area were in the middle of howling and charging toward the Great Wall. However, in the blink of an eye, their howls were cut short. Meanwhile, expressions of wide-eyed astonishment suddenly appeared on the faces of the skin flayers up on the wall. Within that 300-meter area, all of the vengeful souls were suddenly sucked beyond their control in the direction of the exploded pill, and in the blink of an eye, the entire area was empty. From a distance, there was now a large 300-meter hole in the middle of the soul tide, something completely eye-catching that everyone was looking at. To the astonishment of everyone, after the souls were sucked together, they became a head-sized soul sphere that dropped down onto the ground. From the look of it, there were over 10,000 vengeful souls inside of it, all screaming and struggling to no avail to free themselves. Not only were the cultivators on the Great Wall shocked, the savages on the battlefield were completely astounded. There were also many nearby vengeful souls who instinctively stopped in place and looked over. Even some of the soul emperors looked over in surprise. This, Li Hongming said, his mind spinning. Earlier, he had assumed that Bai Xiaochun was pulling out a medicinal pill simply to get some face, but what had actually resulted left him completely and utterly shocked. Zhao Tianzhao's eyes were wide as he looked at the newly emptied 300-meter circle in the middle of the battlefield, and the more than 10,000 vengeful souls struggling in the soul sphere. Gasping, he turned to look at Bai Xiaochun, his expression one of slight confusion. Chen Yushan, as well as the others in their group, were standing there with hearts pounding as they suddenly remembered Bai Xiaochun's actions in the Cyan trial by fire back in the sect. After a moment of silence, the skin flayers on the wall erupted into chaos, their eyes shining with disbelief and shock as they looked over at Bai Xiaochun. Heavens! What just happened? What magical item did he throw out just now? This is unheard of. I can't believe this. I don't think I've ever seen anything that works so well against vengeful souls. Who is that guy? Seeing that not only had his pill worked quite well, but he had also attracted quite a bit of attention, Bai Xiaochun was immediately enlivened. Therefore, he pulled out a whole pile of soul convergence pills and, with a mighty shout, threw them out over the wall, and then began to perform an incantation gesture. Booms began to ring out on the battlefield, and soon, vast numbers of vengeful souls were screaming in anguish. Even one of the soul emperors was caught up, and ended up being sucked away into a soul sphere. The crowd of cultivators on top of the wall stood there in stunned silence. Bai Xiaochun was more excited than ever by this development. Clearing his throat, he happily stuck his chin up and waved his sleeve. Who said I was scared? With the snap of a finger, Bai Xiaochun reduced all those souls to ashes. You think I'm scared of them? Thus, this episode comes to an end. Remember to like and comment so we can discuss the story together. Until we meet again in the next chapters.